Hello and welcome to the Georgia Bulldogs live here on the Voice of College Football. I'm your host, Matt Green, and we come to you live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m., as well as every Saturday night doing our post-game reactions. I guess it was a Friday night this past weekend with Georgia playing on Black Friday. But I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Everyone who's tuning in live. Please like and subscribe, share the channel. We appreciate that. And all that stuff. But this is a big time week, ladies and gentlemen. This is conference championship week. The final college football rankings were just revealed, or the final rankings prior to the conference championships were just revealed. So big time news there. I would say, I guess the biggest news from the rankings, and let me we'll get into the rankings a little bit more after. I have a guest on my show here to talk Texas, Georgia, and the SEC championship. But first, before we get to my guest, these rankings, the biggest reaction from the rankings, I think what everyone is going to take from it is Alabama being ranked at number 11, and they're that highest team that potentially could get in for that final at-large bid. That's basically what the entire ranking show today was basically seeing what does the committee do with Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Miami right there in that 11, 12, 13, 14 spot. And that's what they did. They chose Alabama and then Miami ahead of them. So, that's where they're at right now. So I personally, I'd like to see Ole Miss and Alabama stacked up because South Carolina feels like the best team of those right now. But, with what the rankings are and the head-to-head losses to Alabama and South Carolina and Ole Miss, it's tough to put South Carolina in, even though they're one of the hottest teams. But it's championship week. That's what's most important. National Signing Day is tomorrow, and I can't even think about that right now. We got to keep the main thing. It's SEC championship week. And it's a really weird feeling, I think, around this year's SEC championship. And I think it's because it doesn't have the same just do or die implications that it has in the past. I think it's in the past, you've seen these great games with top 5 matchups and the loser's done. Like, speaking of the playoffs, like I will get more into the playoffs later, but like, this would be such a great year for a 4-team format, as far as I'm concerned. You have the SEC champion gets in, the Big Ten champion gets in, Notre Dame gets in, and maybe if Oregon loses, they get that 4 spot, or maybe SMU, the 1-loss ACC champion, gets it. Maybe it's Tennessee. Like, there's so many flawed teams in the country. Like, it's just, I don't know. The 12-team playoff is going to be fun, but I think everyone right now seems to be so upset by Alabama being that 11 team and being a 3-loss team and still being in contention. And this is what you wanted. If you wanted an expanded playoff, I tried to tell people you weren't going to get more G5s. You were going to get the years like this year where Alabama has 3 losses, Ohio State has 2 losses, and these teams are still in contention. And if you put them in the tournament, we know the talent those kind of programs have. They could win the whole damn thing. Jackson Johnson, what's up, Bulldog Nation? I appreciate you tuning in live. Big time week, SEC championship week here. But yeah, like, this is unfortunately what you wanted. While the season has been like more fun, I would kind of say the upsets, I think, has made it more fun. So under any format, like, this season would have been a lot of fun. There's obviously more games with playoff implications and that sort of thing because now there's 12 playoff teams. But this was the casualty. The casualty was this SEC championship, these conference championship weekend. It just doesn't have the same do or die buzz. Georgia and Texas are both in the college football playoff. And like, I heard someone say maybe the SEC championship should be Ole Miss and Alabama for that final spot this year. And I'm kind of on board with that. So, this is what happens. This is the new format. And here we are. So, with that said, I'm going to bring in my guest here, Matthew Miller, here from Texas, Voice of College Football channel. Matthew, I appreciate you joining me here on Tuesday night.
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited to talk about this game. I'm excited for this game to kick off 4 Eastern time. So just all around, it's going to be a fun week. You said National Signing Day, Texas, flipped a big time LSU commit today, flipped him back actually because he was committed to Texas. So this week's going to be crazy.
I know. I'm an old school guy here, and so I missed the first Wednesday of February signing day. It was like a national holiday to me. Now it's like it's conference championship weekend. Can we really be talking about recruits right now?
Well, and also think about this Sunday, you're going to get the final playoff rankings, and then you're also going to get the transfer portal opening. So
Oh,
that's going to be fun.
I've gone off many times about the calendar of college football. I'm not going to do it right now. It's something needs to be done. This is madness because like you said, as college football fans, yeah, maybe we're not thinking about recruiting, but you have to. Like, it is the future of the sport. It's the lifeblood of the sport is getting these high schoolers. Obviously, it's changed a little with the transfer portal. You can fill some gaps here, but we've seen the best programs. You still got to recruit out of high school year in, year out.
Yeah, 100%. You have to recruit it like on average, a top 10 class. I think the worst recruiting average overall from a national championship team is like Clemson. They were like 11th or 12th, but then you also have like a generational quarterback talent with Deshaun Watson. So that helps too. So if you can't get the great class, you got to get a generational quarterback.
Exactly. And I always thought that was one of the things that was kind of overblown in terms of because people kind of made it sound like, oh, well, Clemson, they don't get the best classes, but they win championships. It's like, yeah, but they were always the best classes in the ACC. In Oklahoma, they might not be signing top 3 classes, but they were always signing like one of the best classes in the Big 12, along with probably you guys each year.
Yeah.
So it's like those teams that were getting to the playoff, they were still getting the best talent in their respective conferences.
Yeah, 100%. You have to recruit at, I think, a top 4 or 5 level in your conference for sure. Otherwise, you don't have a chance. But it just in general, top, I think, 10 to 12 in the nation. Like 12 is like the cutoff point for me. If you're not doing that, you probably can't win a national championship.
For sure. And Bud Elliott always has his like blue chip ratio that he releases and everything. And it's not necessarily that they're all good teams, but it's like these are the teams that have the prerequisite talent to win it all.
Yeah,
but with
100%.
that said, oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. That's all I was going to say.
But yeah, with that said, we're here to talk about the SEC championship. And I don't know if you heard me on the opening here. This just feels kind of weird. It's kind of a weird conference championship weekend because neither of these teams have to have it. Like, they'd love to have it. You want to get that first round bye, and what it's the difference of like I want to say like 17 days off versus like 23 days off or something like that. So, that's definitely going to make a difference, especially a team like Georgia, who's, had all kinds of injury issues in the backfield with the running backs and some on the offensive line. But how is this feeling as a Texas fan? Obviously, first year in the SEC. Now you're in the SEC championship for the first year, and you're favored. So, what's the overall vibe for Texas fans right now?
Yeah, so I think the vibe is just excitement that we could come in here in the first year and win the conference, because for a long time, I mean, people were pulling up receipts of when we went to Arkansas and, just got road graded. Honestly, they had over like 300 yards rushing in that game, and that was the first year of the Steve Sarkisian era. And he's on the sideline, and you could tell by his facial expression, like, this is going to be a lot harder and longer of a rebuild than I thought it was going to be. And he came in the next class and signed one of the best offensive line classes in the history of recruiting. And then to come into the SEC and possibly win it in your first year after building all these classes up is super exciting. And I think that's why maybe that's the difference between a Georgia fan and a Texas fan is we're just excited for this game because, again, this could be the first time we go in the conference, first time playing in this game, and we could win it in our first chance. So that's really cool. And I think there's a little bit more excitement too, because I think whoever wins this game, if Penn State beats Oregon, I think they're going to end up could end up the number 1 seed, especially in Texas's case. And also the loser doesn't get that coveted 5 seed. Neither of these teams, if they lose, in my opinion, will get that 5 seed. Maybe a possibility of Texas if they lose in a super close game on a last second field goal. But that, to me, if you're not getting the 5 seed, you want the 1 seed or 2 seed. You want that bye. But the 5 seed definitely is something to look out for, because right now you would probably either play Boise State or you play Arizona State and then Boise State. So I still think this game matters because you want to win it, obviously, to win the SEC championship game, but you also want to be set up as either the number 1 or number 2 seed.
So you jumped ahead of me a little bit there, but I actually had a hypothetical question set up for you, because I think you're right. I don't think Georgia can really afford, like, they'll make the playoff, I feel confident,
Yeah.
but I don't think they can afford a loss in terms of like it not hurting them I think they probably lose a home playoff game if they lose this game. But as a Texas fan, say, and right now I think Ohio State's the 8, right? Or the
I
8
believe
seed
so. Yeah.
with Tennessee, the 9 seed in that first round matchup. But let's say hypothetically, because you're kind of leading down the path I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's guarantee Ohio State is the 7 seed, right? And so that 7-2 matchup in the second round. I'm doing my math right? Yeah, 7-2 and that would match up in the second round.
Yeah.
Would you rather win the SEC championship or lose and then maybe you're 6 or something, but you win the SEC championship and you get Ohio State in that quarterfinal matchup, or lose and kind of see where you're at? Maybe you're the 6, maybe you're the 8. What would you prefer in that situation?
Yeah, I would rather win because you never know what could happen. Because if let's say Ohio State, for example, they lost that game to Michigan, it's like, well, we don't get a bye. We're still going to get a pretty easy game right now, I would say. Because who are they matched up against right now?
With Ohio State?
Yeah.
Ohio State's got Tennessee right now.
Okay, so they wouldn't be. I was thinking Indiana, but yeah, you just avoid
Georgia and Indiana at 7 and 11 right now. Oh, so I guess Indiana is the 11, so that could be who they could get potentially.
Yeah, you just avoid the injury concern. That's my big thing. You have to play an extra game. Guess what? You run the risk of having a major injury that causes you to lose your season. So you don't have to worry about it if you're on a bye, most likely, unless something freak happens through walkthroughs and I would imagine pretty soft practices. I don't think these guys are going to be hitting leading up to playoff games very much. So it's going to be interesting to me. I would rather win. Now, if you could guarantee me we get the 5 seed, I would change my tune on that, because sign me up for a home playoff game versus Arizona State and then possibly playing Boise. Like, I would way rather get that. But if you're telling me I'm a 6 through 11 seed, I'm taking the 1 or 2 seed for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I think especially after this past week, I think some of the luster has kind of am I using that expression right? Has kind of come off of Ohio State a little bit too. Seen them lose to a 7-5 Michigan team. Now I'm kind of questioning how good Ohio State is, even though I feel like that roster is just loaded.
Yeah, Will Howard really doesn't scare me that much. That's the thing. I've seen him enough in the Big 12 to where, and I saw it versus Michigan. I think if you can shut down the run, which I think this Texas defensive front can versus Ohio State, especially that injury-riddled offensive line, then I think we could definitely beat Ohio State. It'd be a hard game for sure, but it's not something I would rather win this game and play him in the second round. And I'm from Ohio, actually, so it'd be kind of fun to play Ohio State. I'd love to beat them.
Nice.
That'd be an interesting game.
Okay. So who's your NFL team?
I'm all over the place. I'm a Broncos fan.
Okay. No, you don't have to explain to me, man. I don't even need to get started on my NFL fandom. I've been a Stafford guy forever, so I rooted for Detroit. Okay. And like once Vic left the Falcons, like I jumped off the Falcons bandwagon. So I've been born and raised. I root for the Braves and Georgia, but Falcons, I don't know. Falcons just don't do it for me. I'm more of I'm watching Georgia players in the NFL and checking on my fantasy team. I'm a casual NFL fan, but diehard college.
Yeah, I've kind of gone that way. I was a big Indianapolis Colts fan because of Peyton Manning, and then I just followed him to the Broncos, and then I've just stuck with the Broncos since then. Okay. But yeah, my love for the NFL is kind of faded throughout the years. It's not like it used to be. I watched every game, big Peyton Manning fan, didn't miss anything. Lived and died with whatever team he was on, and then ever since he retired, and then once they traded Von Miller, it was basically my love for the NFL kind of ended basically.
That's funny. That's honestly exactly what mine was, with Stafford going to LA, but I'm like, I can't permanently be an LA guy. I can't do that to myself. And now Detroit's finally good. I'm like, I feel like I paid my dues. I need to go back to the Lions.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So let me get my train of thought here. So yeah, a lot of SEC fans I think have been kind of like in their feelings at times about the rankings. Before I say that, Georgia Gal 12 watching live. I appreciate you. Let's see. You got a question here? Which head coach? Let's see. Before I move on, let's go to the chat here. So which head coach is the best recruiter in the NIL era? There is only one correct answer. I mean, I think she's implying Kirby Smart, but I don't know about the NIL era. I'm kind of questioning. I think before NIL stuff started, Georgia was killing it. Now now I'm worried we don't get into those bidding wars like some other teams do.
I think Money's the best recruiter in the
Yeah,
NIL era.
absolutely. What's his name? Dave Portnoy. That might be the best
Yeah.
recruiter in the NIL era. So let's see here. But I appreciate you guys tuning in live. But yeah, what I was gonna say, I feel like some of the SEC fans have been like getting in their feelings this year about like where they've been in the rankings in terms of like strength of schedule. And I've just kind of stayed quiet the whole time because I'm just like, I don't know who in this conference is actually good. Like, I look at the three playoff teams right now with Georgia, like, the inconsistency is like crazy with Georgia. Obviously, the toughest schedule in the country, but just so many the Kentucky performance, the Georgia Tech game from this past week, like just so many games that could have been losses, and obviously got blown off the field by Ole Miss. Like Tennessee has got the one good win over Alabama. Other than that, Tennessee hasn't really done much in terms of their resume. Their offense, it's got the 5-star quarterback, but if it didn't have a 5-star quarterback, you wouldn't know. Like it hadn't played like they have a 5-star quarterback. So I think they've scored 30 points twice in the SEC this year, and it was against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. I know this is an improved Vanderbilt team, but this Tennessee offense just doesn't really scare you. And then Texas, my biggest criticism of Texas has really just been the schedule. It's like before that A&M win, Texas has beaten the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 15th, and 16th teams in the SEC standings this year. I don't know what you guys did and what Oklahoma did to deserve two crazy different schedules. But that's been my biggest criticism of Texas is that I don't even know how good they are because they have the one game against Georgia where, you lost at home by 2 touchdowns and the best win of the season was last week versus Texas A&M. And I would say it was more dominant than the 17-7 scoreboard, but it especially A&M's offense did nothing essentially the entire game. But it's just so many flawed teams in this conference, and then you have obviously the 3-loss teams they're trying to get in the playoff. But I just I this a long-winded question, but like, who are you confident is good in the SEC this year?
So good. I'm confident in both these teams in the SEC championship game. I'm confident in Ole Miss and South Carolina. I'm actually not confident in Alabama. I think they're very one-dimensional. There are no great teams. I've been saying that on my show for a while. I don't think there's a great team right now in college football. You can tell me Oregon, and I would argue that as well. And I think you'll see that this week. I actually think Penn State's going to beat Oregon, but I
Oh, wow.
I just don't think there's a great team this year. And I think people want to anoint a team for whatever reason. I think you see that in all sports. Like we always try to find the best and say, this is the best team. They're going to win it all. Every year you have to find that team. I just don't think that team exists this year. I really think it's pretty wide open. And that's actually the biggest argument I have for the 12th team this year. Because I actually think like last year, I talked about this with my co-host. I think there's 7 or 8 teams from last year. If you dropped into this year, they'd be an overwhelming favorite. I think last year's Texas team could win the national championship pretty easily from this year. I think Georgia's team from last year would be the best team in this year from college football. I think Washington, Michigan, Ohio State even would probably win the national championship if you just drop that team in. And I think this is just a down year. And I think a lot of that has to do with the inconsistency in quarterback play. If you look around the nation, I think there's really only 2 great quarterbacks. I think it's Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Everyone else has been pretty up and down the whole year. Like Quinn Ewers, up and down. Carson Beck, up and down. Will Howard, like even that he's in the discussion of like a top 10 quarterback is crazy because last year was like the 25th best quarterback in the country if you're ranking quarterbacks. But because of a down year in college football with quarterbacks, I think you've seen that take on with the whole team as well. And I've also think combined with that, I think teams have started to figure out how to stop these offenses. I think the defenses have finally caught up. I think that's part of the reason too, but I think it's just a down year in college football. I think there's a lot of good teams, but I don't think there's any great teams.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you even look at a Florida State team from last year without Jordan Travis, like with some of the quarterback play in this year's team, with this year's contenders, they might even could win something. Because I mean that roster was loaded, even if they didn't have a quarterback down the stretch. That's kind of one of my biggest arguments. Because I mean, as a Georgia fan, the expectations are just national championship, right? So this has felt like a very disappointing season, and like Georgia's a very underwhelming team. But I try to remind people what you just said. I agree 100%. Dylan Gabriel's having a great season. I don't put him in that Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, that guy they can just like take over a game. No. I don't put him in that company. So like Carson Beck, like in terms of who you get matched up against in the playoff, like there's not really going to be a team that has a quarterback advantage over Georgia. And Carson Beck's had his struggles, but he's just still a really good quarterback. It says more about the lack of elite quarterbacks than Carson Beck being like some sort of great player. Like, I mean, he is really good, but like Quinn Ewers, Carson Beck, like I was kind of anticipating like the winner of Georgia Texas back in October, it was going to be a quarterback duel. Like who does better? Like Carson Beck's going to have to lead this offense, and then Georgia's defense decided to show up for the one time all season, and Georgia won that game 30-15. So that's what I'm most curious. So what are you most confident about when you look at this when you look at this Texas team and against this Georgia against Georgia?
Yeah, so I think if you're looking just at the 4 units, I'm not going to talk about special teams. If you look at both defenses and offenses, I think the best unit out of the 4 is the Texas defense, and the thing I'm most confident in because it's been the most consistent. Like you said about Georgia, they played a fantastic defensive game versus Texas. I think they played a fantastic defensive half versus Tennessee and a fantastic defensive half versus Alabama. Other than that, they've been completely up and down. If you look at the Georgia offense, it's kind of the same way. They played a great game versus Georgia Tech, I thought, or at least a great half. Then they played a great half or even game versus Tennessee and a great half versus Alabama. Other than that, they've been up and down. The Texas offense is the same way. That I thought overall, the Texas versus Texas A&M first half, that was the best first half Texas has played as a unit, like offense, defense, and special teams. And then you see the third quarter, complete meltdown. You throw a pick six, then you fumble in the red zone, then you get a blocked punt. Like they just tried to give that game away. And we've seen that happen in the Kentucky game. You're completely dominating Kentucky in that first half. Third quarter, you completely, what, down your leg. We've seen that. The
There's
only
a defensive touchdown in that one too, right?
Yeah,
Kentucky?
pick. It was, I don't know if it was a pick or fumble. It came out of Quinn's hand. He was getting hit and it fell, and it like the guy caught it and ran in. I don't know if they consider that a fumble or interception.
That was Dumas Johnson, the Georgia transfer.
Yeah. But the Texas defense has been steady from game one. They have looked phenomenal and they've only gotten better. Since the Georgia game, they've really turned it on pass rushing wise. They had 6 sacks versus Kentucky. They had 6 sacks versus Arkansas. I think they had 4 versus A&M. So they're really starting to get after the quarterback too. And then you probably have the Thorpe Award winner in Jahdae Barron. So I really believe in the Texas defense.
Yeah, I think that's fair because I think that's something that gets a little lost from the first time that these teams played is that Texas shut down Georgia offensively. Like, obviously Georgia Georgia turned it over 3 times of their own, but Georgia was just creating those havoc plays, 7 sacks, forced 4 turnovers, but they were getting 30-yard fields and 20-yard fields, and Texas's defense really didn't give up much in that game, but Georgia's defense is what really set up the offense, and that's kind of been the opposite of every other game this year. Like, I guess the one drive, and that honestly was what I was kind of going back to with Georgia fans, because I mean it was toxic here about a month ago with the Carson Beck stuff and 11 interception games in like a 3-4 game or 9. It was like 11 interceptions, like a 4-game span, I want to say. Is that final drive after like Texas fans threw everything on the field and like they scored on the short field and just had all the momentum. Like that's when Beck put together, like it was like an 85-yard drive or something like that, and it kind of calmed everybody down. So he's still the guy, right? Like people were talking about, do we need to bench Carson Beck? Like, no, let's relax here. So he's still the guy, but yeah, I'm with you. This Texas defense is nasty. Like I think most Georgia fans, because we had 2021, we had 2022, we're like, oh, and we have Kirby Smart, right? We're just like, okay, at some point we're going to start playing elite defense. And it felt like, okay, this Texas game was the turning point, and it wasn't the turning point at all. Like they gave up 29 rushing yards against Texas. Since then, 5 games since then, they've allowed 176 rushing yards a game, and that was 260 to Tech last week, 226 to UMass the week before that. Which I mean, take that for what it's worth, but it's still really bad. Like maybe they didn't get up for the UMass game, but like okay. You still give up 200 yards rushing. It's just, I think Georgia's defense is kind of getting a pass a little bit, and so much is put on this offense. I think a bigger part of the offensive struggles are because the defense is not getting off the field. Like you're seeing a lot of games where Georgia gets 3-4 possessions in an entire half, you saw the Georgia Tech had the 10-minute drive in the third quarter, like owning the time of possession. Like Georgia scored touchdowns on 6 straight drives to end that game and the first 2 periods of overtime. Like I think this, and when they're not scoring, it's the drops. It's so many self-inflicted errors, and so that's why it feels like in terms of a team that hasn't played a complete game, they feel like some teams don't play a complete game ever because they're not a complete team, right? But in terms of the teams that haven't played a complete game, Georgia seems like one that's at least capable of it because they've played half games on both sides of the ball, but you've just seen so few games where they put it all together.
Yeah, 100%. Texas is kind of the same way. I've seen halves versus Texas for Texas. I mean, the first half versus Michigan was probably our best half all year, just in general. I mean, we killed them. We scored on the first 4 out of the first 5 drives. We have yet to do that percent. Like I don't even count the Florida game because for whatever reason, Florida just decided that week, hey, we're packing it in this week. We don't have DJ Lagway. We don't have a chance, and we just absolutely destroy them. It was 35-0 at halftime. And that was the week after the Georgia game too. So that was just a weird week in general. But other than that, like it's been really hard for Texas to do a lot offensively. It's kind of been relying on the screen game, and that's just not going to work versus Georgia. We saw that in the first game. I think that was the biggest issue is we tried to go east and west versus a super athletic team. And I think it'll be different this game. I think Steve Sarkisian realized that. I think you're going to have to early on try to force the ball down the field. Doesn't mean you have to complete them, but it'll at least put them on their heels enough to where they think about, coming full downhill and blowing up these screens when they are thrown later in the game. So I think that's important. And I think you also have to run the ball like you have the past month of the season as well.
Yeah, I think those are some great points. I think it's funny you say the screen game because that's like as a Georgia fan, I feel like that's when I know if we're bringing it defensively. It's like when they're throwing those to the flat and Georgia's like tackling the dude at the line of scrimmage and you're just coming downhill and just bringing the intensity. Like it's just you see some of these games where you just throw to the sideline, they pick up 7 yards, and you're just like, what are we doing? It can't be this easy. And so that Texas game was honestly one of the first games this year. I'm like, okay, we're starting to do Georgia stuff right now. I'm liking seeing this. And there's the big news this week also that Julian Humphrey has already going to enter the transfer portal, not even going to play in the SEC championship. He had kind of gotten his second starting corner spot taken by Daniel Harris. I think it was the first possession of the Tennessee game. He got a pass interference. And then I'm not sure Julian Humphrey's played since then. So I think he was a guy, I want to say he entered the portal last offseason and was convinced to come back. And so, yeah, he's a Texas guy, right? Mm-hmm. And so now he is in the portal. So Georgia did sign the number 1 player in the country last year, Ellis Robinson. We hardly really seen that guy play any meaningful snaps this year. Maybe we see some of him with Julian Humphrey out completely, but that'll be something to watch for sure in this game. So what is it that I guess this kind of got Georgia Gal 12 in the chat here. This kind of goes along to my question because last game Georgia won 30-15 on the road, right? And I don't know exactly how much we can take from that game. So I kind of want you to tell me what you take from that first matchup with this game of these two teams. And Georgia Gal's question right here: what should UT do differently in handling Georgia's defense this time around, especially on third down, which they struggled with last time?
Yeah, the third down, we'll just work with that one first. That was because you didn't get any yards on first and second down, so you were living in 3rd and 7+ versus a defense that was playing lights out that night. So you got to do first down a lot better. You got to get into the 2nd and 6, 2nd and 5, even 2nd and 7. I think you can live with, but somewhere in that range. And like I said, I think you just cannot come out because Steve Sarkisian loves to do this. He's done it his whole time at Texas. He gets Quinn into rhythm with passes, quick out passes, quick in the flat passes, quick screen passes to get him set up, and then he'll attack you deep. I think you got to work opposite in this game because, again, Georgia was sitting on that all night. They blew it up. It did not work. And then by that time, they were so confident in everything they did, and we were not confident in anything we did. It was a big issue. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of running game early from Texas and then some play actions off of that and, trying to hit mesh routes, drag routes, or just, those routes that take a long time to develop off the play action where you're basically just running to the sideline and versus zone. And even, man, if your guy's more athletic, you can hit that a lot of the time. They hit that with Ryan Wingo versus A&M. I think you're going to see a lot of those early on, and then you'll see the screen game later. So Georgia's thinking before they attack downhill. I think that's the game plan from Steve Sarkisian. We're going to have to run the ball better. That's the number one thing. Like, you can't have 27 yards rushing, and I know they take the sack numbers out, but still, Trey Wisner only had 15 carries for 52 yards. I'm thinking between Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner for Texas to win this football game, you're going to need somewhere between 30 to 35 carries for about 135 to 155 yards. That's the range I'm thinking about for Texas to win this football game. And I think they can do that. They're capable. Like, A&M is, you can say whatever they want about their offense. Their defensive line, all those guys are going to be playing in the NFL, and Nick Skouertson's going to be a first-round pick. So we dominated them physically up front. I think the offensive line, and I've seen it ever since that second bye week, the Florida, the Arkansas, the Kentucky game, the Texas A&M game, we've run the ball much better. I do expect them to run the ball much better. The only question I have in this game really is, can Quinn Ewers hit those timely throws? If he does, I think they win the game. If he doesn't, I think they'll lose in a close game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Wisner had 15 for 52 on the ground versus Georgia the first time. Yeah, negative 34 yards from Ewers obviously works against that rushing total. And that was probably that's another thing from that first game, is that's probably one of the better games Georgia's had running the ball. Like that, this team ranks 15th in the SEC in running rush offense so far. Etienne had 87 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground in that game. Etienne's probably been the best playmaker on Georgia's team offensively on Georgia's team this year, and he's probably not going to be healthy for this game. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. And that's the other thing. If this is a 4-team playoff and this is to get in, Etienne's probably playing. Like, how much is a guy, and we can get into Kelvin Banks as well, like a guy that's maybe questionable for this game? Do they risk it if they don't have to have this win to get in the college football playoff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what Steve Sarkisian said in his press conference about Kelvin Banks. Basically said he's in the same position that Quinn was last week. So that tells me he'll probably try to give it a go. My guess is they'll treat this a lot like the NFL, to where these guys don't, if they're injured, they really don't practice that much till like Thursday, and then they'll test it. And if they test well that day, then they'll try to play him. If they don't, they'll just sit him out. Trevor Gooseby is his replacement. He got his first real action versus A&M, and he was phenomenal. I was pleasantly shocked. He was the 11th highest graded offensive lineman in all of college football, according to Pro Football Focus, with his time coming in for Kelvin Banks. Like, you didn't even notice Kelvin Banks was gone, and that's crazy to say, because Kelvin Banks is going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. So I was shocked by that. Now, do I think he's going to play that well versus Georgia in this game? Probably not. But do I think he'd be good enough? Yeah. And I also think Texas will help him out, probably put some 12 or even 13 personnel out there to get the big boys out there to block a little bit better, and maybe slide protection his way. But we'll have to find out. I do think Kelvin Banks will give it a try, though, to play in this game.
Yeah, we'll see. That was one of the more surprising things in the first time these teams played was how Georgia was able to get pressure with Kelvin Banks and that offensive line. At risk of being very unprofessional here, I just realized I didn't have to turn my light on here, so I'm probably sitting kind of dark. I'm just gonna go for it. Let's just do it here. There we go. Oh man, not too much, but here we go. I'm a little brighter now. So yeah, let's get back. So I guess what are you most concerned about in terms of, at the end of the day? I think most people agree, like, what was this, 23-0 at halftime the first time around, and Georgia had like 50 total yards of offense or something, and it was like 23-0. I think most people anticipate like Texas is not going to get in a 23-0 hole again, right? But at the same time, it was being played in Austin, Texas. So you lose by 2 touchdowns in Austin. What are the thoughts of playing a neutral sited game? And I think I think this is the 8th rematch in SEC championship history, and the team who won the first game is actually 5-2. But it feels like you never want to play a team twice, right? But yeah. So what are you most concerned about in terms of a neutral site where Texas actually is a 2.5-point favorite?
Yeah, so I actually think this kind of favors Texas to go on the road. They've won their last, I think, 12 road games. For whatever reason, they play better on the road. I think they carry a chip with them when they go into an opposing stadium, and they like to silence the crowd for whatever reason. And I think they'll do a pretty good job with that. I would say the thing I'm most concerned about is the special teams. The special teams has not been good for Texas the whole year. Like, there isn't even a bright spot that I'm thinking of. Like, there isn't a big 65-yard punt. There isn't a big 51-yard field goal in a crucial time. Bert Auburn is 50-50 at this point at best from 45 yards and out. Michael Kern is one of the worst punters in the country. I think he was the worst punter in the country when it comes to the average. Yeah, and Texas is used to great specialists. Like, if you go down the list of Texas specialists, you have Justin Tucker, who kicked and punted here. He's pretty damn good up until this year in the NFL. You have guys like Michael Dixon, who won the award for the best punter when he was here. He was the bowl game MVP of a bowl game. That's how good of a punter he was, because he averaged like 55 yards a punt. Yeah, he was really good. And then we have these two guys, no offense, they're pretty. I mean, Bert Auburn was fantastic last year. I don't know what happened. Michael Kern has been dreadful this
year. Is it Dicker the kicker?
Yeah,
right?
Cameron Dicker. Yeah, he's phenomenal with the Chargers. I think he's only missed one kick or two kicks his whole time in the NFL, under 50. So he's like really good. He might be the best kicker in the NFL now. So yeah, we've really struggled with that this year. It has to get better going forward. I don't expect it to be that much better in the SEC championship game. What I said on my live show, give me 40 yards and under, be automatic Bert Auburn, be 95%. And then Michael Kern, don't get punts blocked and don't shank them. If you want to punt them 42 yards, that's fine, but those two things can't happen. I also think it's going to force Steve Sarkisian to be more aggressive in certain situations. When it's 4th and 2, 4th and 3 at the 40-yard line, I think they're going to go for it. Maybe not, because you have that defense, which is really special. Maybe you take the 5-yard penalty and punt it. We'll have to see how he handles that, but it could force him to go for those on that side of the field.
So has it been just the kickers and the punters? Has it been like, have they given up big returns and like kicks or punt returns?
No, that's the one thing they haven't done. So far, they have not given up an explosive return in the kick or punt game. Will Stone's great at it. He'll just kick it out of the back of the end zone. The punting game, honestly, the punts are so short and bad. Most people either let them bounce or just fair catch them. So that's my biggest concern here. And then we got one blocked finally last week versus Texas A&M. So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, man, it felt like A&M was doing all of the little BS stuff that you need to like upset a team that is clearly significantly better than you are. And they almost did it. It felt like when they blocked that punt and went out of bounds, it felt like they're not going to score. Like they may have just recovered it inside the 20. It was like the 18. I was like, they needed to score on that. They're not going to move the ball.
No, I literally was saying is when that got blocked, I was like, go out of bounds, go out of bounds, go out of bounds. And then once he fell down, I was like, yes, they're not going to score. If they do, it's going to be a field goal. They were never in trouble, or Texas was never in jeopardy of giving up a real touchdown other than that first drive, unless Texas gave them a touchdown like a pick six or that. But the defense was not going to let him drive 60, 70 yards and score a touchdown. I think that was pretty clear after the first drive. And Texas really didn't do that in the first Georgia game. Like you said, it was 30-yard drive, 33-yard drive, 27-yard drive, stuff of that nature. They only had one drive the whole night. And it was the most needed. It was 23-15. Georgia was backed up in their own territory. I think it was 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11 from their own 9. And if we get the ball there, which is crazy to say, we probably get the ball around the 45-yard line with a chance to go tie the game, which when I was watching this game, it was like, how this should not even be close. And we're going to have a chance if we make this stop. So I think that's what gives Texas fans hope, is because the offense at one point in that first half, Quinn Ewers had negative yards throwing. I don't think that's going to happen in this game. I mean, if it does, props to Georgia. They played another fantastic game, and Texas played a really bad game. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, in that first game, the first drive, it was 4 plays, 13 yards for a touchdown, then 3 plays, 34 yards for a touchdown. Another drive that started at the 45. Yeah, we'll see if Georgia has that sort of luck the second time around with getting short fields. I guess not luck. The defense did their part and obviously forced those short fields, but the offense is probably not going to get those gifts the second time around. Especially, I just don't know what to expect from this Georgia defense. I mean, it's the fact that they've been run on the way they have, and Texas is coming off that performance against A&M, where what they ran for like 250 or something.
To over 250 yards versus A&M.
Yeah, so that's probably my biggest concern from a Georgia perspective, is if this is just not the way Georgia's used to getting run on. Like, I think before last year, so year 2 of Kirby Smart, when they went to the national championship game, they lost a lot defensively. And I think that following year, 2018, they gave up like 100 yards a game on the ground. Like that was the worst run defense of the Kirby Smart era, giving up 100. And then last year, I think he gave up like 110, 115 a game. And now they're sitting at like 135 a game, 136 a game, I think. So that's got to worry you as a Georgia fan. And that's who they've been most of the season. And that's not who they were the first time they played Texas. So the other side of it is Carson Beck just played so terribly against Texas. Because I personally, obviously, Quinn Ewers didn't have good production. I felt like Quinn Ewers, and maybe this is me being a biased fan, you can tell me, I felt like Quinn Ewers was getting abused, like Carson Beck did against Ole Miss. Like they couldn't block Ole Miss's defensive line. The quarterback wasn't playing poorly. The quarterback was getting murdered. So I don't feel like Quinn Ewers necessarily played poorly against Georgia, even though he got benched, which seemed kind of questionable at the time. Arch Manning didn't really do much. We haven't even talked about Arch Manning. He might be an X factor in this one, but I feel like Carson Beck was just making terrible decisions and just playing really bad. Like one of the picks was off a deflection, but still, it's like he felt like he played poorly more than like Quinn Ewers was like forced to play but poorly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I went back and watched the game, and I had other people, like, I'm not like the biggest, scout, obviously, but Quinn Ewers stepped up into the pocket, or did not step up into the pocket when it was available, and ran out a lot of clean pockets in that game. That was the biggest issue I had with him. And Kelvin Banks, I think, got a lot of hate in that game. And then when you go back and watch it, like the Jalen Walker sack, the first one, he's literally laying on the ground, and if Quinn Ewers just takes one step forward, that doesn't happen. Like Kelvin Banks won that rep, and actually Kelvin Banks got angry after that. He's like, "What? Why are you doing that? Like, why don't you just step up?" So that's my biggest thing with Quinn is, for whatever reason, in that game, and then he's gotten progressively better throughout the season since that game. And it was weird because in the Michigan game, he was fantastic at it. He just didn't step up into clean pockets. And then when he thought the internal clock was going faster than it should have, and he was leaving them at sometimes too, and then that led to sacks too. Like out of the 7 sacks, I would say the offensive line, after watching it again, and like I said, other people watching it and giving their opinion, I think the offensive line really only gave up 2 sacks in that game. I think 5 of those have to go on Quinn Ewers. He was just really bad at reading the defense, and he also didn't let it rip. There were plays to be made there. I watched the Brooks Austin, which a lot of guys, Georgia fans will know who that is, game film today. And he talked about, like, there's 3 to 4 throws he mentioned that was like, this is here. This was drawn up well. Quinn Ewers just didn't rip it. But that's a Quinn Ewers thing. That's not just because that isn't a one-game thing. He does that. And that's why I don't know what to expect from him in this game. Do we get the good Quinn Ewers? Do we get the bad Quinn Ewers? Do we get somewhere in between? I think if we get the good Quinn Ewers, I actually think Texas wins this game by, like 10 points. I think if we get a good one, it's a close game. If we get a bad one, Georgia could blow us out again. Like, he was abysmal in that game, and that did have something to do with Georgia, but it also had to do with him regressing to something we haven't seen really since his freshman year. It was really weird.
And that could speak to why Sark, benched him near the end of the second quarter. It's like, look, just settle down and get back in there. Because, I mean, once he came back in the second half, he definitely seemed to, have his groove. I do feel like, because there seems to be a lot of hate on Carson Beck among the Georgia fan base. And I look at Georgia's offense, and I'm like, we're 15th in the SEC in running rush offense. We're first in the nation in drops. Our offensive line hasn't been very good. Pass pro, I guess they've been fine. I think he's been sacked like 16, 17 times. So they've been solid in pass pro. But if you told me Georgia is the worst run offense in the SEC and we lead the nation in drops, I think this team might be like a 4-loss team or something. So I think Carson Beck's kind of the one that's keeping this offense going. You're going to need some help. You can't catch it 4 guys, right? So you've seen the Alabama game, the Tennessee game. Arian Smith dropped like 30, 40-yard bombs, first possession of the game that leads to a 3 and out. Last week versus Georgia Tech, it was like a little 3rd and 3 for like a 6-7 yard gain. 3rd down drop that leads to another 3 and out. You just, what that does to a quarterback, to just a 3 and out when we should be moving down the field. Now we can go up tempo. It throws everything off. So I personally think this duel of Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And at times, I think I trust, like you said, I think I trust Texas's defense more than I trust this Georgia defense. The one advantage Georgia has, I think, is that they're more battle tested. We've seen Texas. It's really the Texas A&M game and the Georgia game are kind of the data point. I mean, obviously, I still kind of give them credit for Michigan because Michigan wasn't bad yet, right? It something seems different about the vibes when it's like week 1, week 2, and a team that becomes bad. It's like they're not bad yet. So that was obviously a dominant performance versus Michigan, but that's kind of how I see it. Do you want to give a score prediction?
Yeah, so I think Texas does win the game. I think it's going to be super close. I think it's going to be semi-low scoring. I'm going to go 26-20. It would not shock me if Georgia wins this game. Believe me, that's why I'm picking it close. I thought it'd be close last time. I do agree. I think there's not going to be much taken from last game that's going to apply to this game. I think it's going to be its own separate entity because we've seen these teams throughout a 12-game sample size now, and the average of like their performances wasn't that game. Like the average of Texas wasn't that game. The average of Georgia wasn't that game. I think you're going to see something closer to the averages. And I think it's going to be a really close game. It would not surprise me if Georgia wins like 23-21, Texas wins something like that, but I'm going to go 26-20 Texas.
All right, I like it. I'm thinking this one gets up into the 30s. I don't know. These are some good offenses. I don't know. I'm not. Maybe I want it to get into the 30s because I don't trust Georgia's defense that much right now. But maybe I'll have a score prediction by the end of the end of the episode. But Matthew Miller, where can the people find you, sir?
Yeah, so you can find me on the Texas channel at the Voice of College Football and also the SEC channel at the Voice of College Football. I host both those shows, so please check that out. We go live Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern time for the Texas show. Also, my Twitter is Matthew MS97 if you want to follow me on there. It's mostly sports over there, talking Texas. I did tweet about the Broncos last night because Levi Wallace at cornerback was getting abused, so I did tweet about him as well in the Broncos. So we keep it sports over there.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you joining me, man. First guest in my time here on the Voice of College Football. So I appreciate it. And good luck. I hope you have fun on Saturday. I hope you're not cheering or celebrating or anything.
I hope the same to you. I'm hoping I do a little bit more celebrating than you do. And I'm excited to watch this game.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
Yep. See ya.
All right. Well, I appreciate Matthew Miller from the Texas Voice of College Football for joining us here. That was a lot of fun. And man, this game, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think, like I said, I think what I'm most encouraged about is I feel like Carson Beck is kind of coming into his own at this point in the season because when you look at Georgia, this team, they have a lot of ability. And I've said this a lot, like everyone loves to say, we haven't played a complete game yet. We haven't hit our stride yet. We haven't even begun to peak. And when I look at Georgia, they're at least one of those teams that's played a full game on defense, a full game on offense, maybe a half on defense, maybe a half on offense. There's team that they are a team. I should slow down there. They're a team that looks elite at times on both sides of the football. They just got to do it. They just got to put it together for 4 quarters. We know about the 5 stars all over this defensive unit, and this defensive line doesn't have the talent that it's had in years past, but they've still had some dominant performances versus Texas, obviously we mentioned, and versus Clemson early in the season. So I think that's in them, but it remains to be seen. This team the receivers have to catch some passes, that's for sure. This offense, that's just Georgia's just so much better when they're going up tempo, and if you're dropping passes, that's just gonna derail so many drives. And like me and Matthew were talking about, this Texas defense is no joke. Georgia didn't drive the ball on them very many times in that first matchup, so that's ultimately going to be the biggest test. But if Kelvin Banks is out, like we were talking about, that star left tackle for Texas, potential top 5 pick, top 10 pick, like if that guy's out, like Georgia gave this defensive line a lot of trouble the first go round. So if you oh man, I meant to ask him about Arch Manning. We didn't even talk about Arch Manning. Arch Manning is obviously the big time 5-star backup quarterback, but this guy's been an X factor at times. So I think that he could definitely be a guy that breaks out for Texas, that shows some things. You saw him with a touchdown run against Texas A&M this past week. So that remains to be seen there. So I will give a score here. He said 26-20. I think Georgia gets this one done. I'm going to say 27-24. Georgia wins this one in Atlanta. Kirby Smart is 2-4 in SEC championships in his time at Georgia. His 7th SEC championship game appearance in his 9 years at Georgia. So like I said, he's 2-4 in the SEC championship, but he's 2-1 against teams not named Alabama. So we love to flex that stat for a while. That Georgia won 50 whatever straight games versus teams not named Alabama until Ole Miss ruined that about 3 or 4 weeks ago. To this point, Georgia's had a lot of success in Atlanta versus teams not named Alabama. You can go back to the Oregon game in 2022, even the Clemson game earlier this year. There's another Chick-fil-A, North Carolina, year 1 of Kirby Smart. Is that the only one? I feel like I'm forgetting another Chick-fil-A kickoff game, but yeah. So that would mean like 5-1. I think Georgia is in Mercedes-Benz Stadium when not playing Alabama. So they're not playing Alabama on Saturday, so maybe that'll help. But Georgia comes in as a 2.5-point underdog in the SEC championship, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And now, like I said earlier, college football playoff rankings just came out today, and I think that's the biggest topic, I think, right now. So let me get here. Oh, there we go. There we got our playoff rankings right here. So this is what the bracket looks like right now. You got the 1 seed Oregon, the 2 seed Texas, the 3 seed SMU, and the 4 seed Boise State. So Georgia winds up in that 7 versus 11 game versus Indiana. And obviously this is not how it's going to shake out, because I think if Georgia loses, I think Georgia will lose a home playoff game if they lose. I don't know that. So just to finish that off, Penn State is sitting at the 5 seed, the infamous 5 seed. Everyone wants the 5 seed. Penn State's sitting at that 5 seed right now, and they're going to potentially lose to Oregon in the Big Ten championship, so that could change. But they're playing the 12 seed Arizona State, the presumed champion from the Big 12. Then you have that 8-9 matchup of Ohio State, Tennessee, which I might not be a playoff expansionist, but seeing Tennessee, Ohio State in the postseason with something meaningful, like that's going to be a lot of fun. Ohio State as the home team, and then Notre Dame as the 6th seed hosting number 11 Alabama, or the 6th seed, the 6th seed hosting 11 Alabama, and then the 7 seed Georgia facing the 10 seed Indiana. So that's going to change. So if Georgia wins, I think obviously Georgia get that too, and like Matthew was talking about on from the Texas part of the show, if Oregon loses, the SEC champion could make a bid for that 1 seed. I guess it's probably more realistic if Texas wins to get that 1 seed, but the SEC champion, obviously that title carries a lot of weight. And if Georgia wins it, they'll have beaten the number 2 team in the country to do that. So I guess if Penn State wins, they're the likely number 1 seed. I think the Big Ten champ is and probably should be number 1. I guess you could make an argument if Texas wins, and avenges their only loss of the season. But the biggest story from this, like I was saying earlier, is Alabama sitting there at number 11 in the rankings. So everyone's upset about Alabama sitting there in the rankings, and I'm not sure who you think should be ahead of them. Like, I've heard people go on these rants about, oh, it's all about brand bias and TV dollars, and this is such a joke. It's like, who are you putting in? You're putting in another 3-loss team. Like, South Carolina is super hot right now. Like, I think South Carolina seems like a better team than Alabama right now today. But South Carolina lost to Ole Miss, and they lost to Alabama. Like, the games do matter. I think South Carolina's resume is impressive. They have better losses. They don't have a loss to an unranked team, I don't believe. Oh, no, they lost to LSU. Also, can we factor that in? They were cheated. Like, the LSU game was stolen from them. So if we can factor that in, that we just throw out that LSU game, Lenora Sellers is out for the second half, that pick 6 would-be pick six where they called the roughing the passer, unnecessary roughness, whatever it was. I guess they called it roughing the passer, but it was on the return. So I just still don't understand why that was reversed. But regardless, South Carolina is one of the hottest teams right now, but you have those losses to Ole Miss and Alabama. They played you, and Ole Miss blasted South Carolina on their own field. So I just, at the end of the day, yeah, you have an argument as a 3-loss team, but you can't really be that salty when you're a 3-loss team when you're sitting on the outside looking in. Like, Alabama's just lucky that they're the 3-loss team that is sitting, and I should say they're lucky in terms of the new format, but like, Miami's the other 2-loss team right there. Miami hasn't beaten anybody. Like, who's Miami's best win? I'm not even looking at their resume right now. They've lost 2 of their last 3 games to Georgia Tech and Syracuse. And I called that Syracuse win, I want to say, before the season started. And I didn't call it last week, but I'm still going to give myself half credit for it. Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point they beat Florida in the swamp, like Louisville, like Virginia Tech, like that was controversial. Cal, that was a controversial win, and those teams aren't even good. Miami's sitting there at 2 losses. Like, I feel like there's no argument. And so I'm very confused at how the committee made a distinction that Alabama is better than Miami, but Miami's better than Ole Miss and South Carolina. Miami in no way has the resume of Ole Miss or South Carolina either. So Ole Miss and Alabama both have bad losses, but at least all of Ole Miss's losses were close. Like, there's something about getting dominated the way they did at Oklahoma, a bad Oklahoma team, that just didn't sit right with me as a college football consumer here. So the people who wanted to expand the playoff, they thought what they were doing was giving the little guy a shot, and that's not what you were doing. You were making it so that when the blue bloods, when the best of the best have their down years, they're still getting in the playoff. And I don't think that's what the people wanted. I think the entire complaint of the 14 playoff was, we get to the same teams every year. Oh, it's the same teams every year. Yeah, because Clemson and Alabama were elite college football programs. Like, there was nothing about the format that gave Clemson, other than just giving Clemson a semifinal, just they win the garbage ACC and they get to go to the semifinals. Like, that was an advantage, obviously, but that run Clemson had was just unprecedented. Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, like 2 all-time great quarterbacks, at least, in the last couple of decades, some of the best quarterbacks you've seen in college football, among a defensive line with a bunch of first rounders on it. Like, Clemson was loaded. And if you have a 12-team playoff or a 4-team playoff, or probably the BCS era, Clemson's going to win a couple of national championships. So we just overreacted to, Nick Saban's the greatest coach of all time. Like, unparalleled consistency. Like, make whatever format you want. Alabama's going to dominate that. Like, if anything, the 4-team playoff helped Alabama, because it, like, a year like 2013 and the kick 6 happens, Alabama's still getting in the 4-team playoff. Probably will win the damn thing. So this is not what I think people thought they were signing up for when they wanted this playoff expansion, because, like I was saying at the top, like, this would just be a pretty clean year for the top 4. Other than the fact that with the expansion, we've seen, lopsided conference strength of schedule, like in terms of a strength of schedule, like Texas compared to Georgia, or a Tennessee compared to Georgia. Like, some of these teams are not playing the same strength of schedule. Like, Tennessee is sitting here right now thinking they accomplished more this season than they have previously. Like, no, you haven't. This is exactly what Tennessee did in 2022. They beat Alabama. They lost to Georgia in Athens by multiple scores. And they had kind of an inexplicable loss to a mediocre team on the road. Like, 2022 and 2024 Tennessee are essentially the same, not saying the same type of team, but the same accomplishment, but we just broadened the field. So we just made the pool bigger, and now Tennessee has now quote unquote accomplished more. Like, Penn State, we just decided, no, instead of playing 2 difficult games every year and losing to Ohio State, Michigan every year, you just have to play 1 difficult game this year, and they lose to Ohio State. Now they're in the conference championship. So, Yeah, it's a weird year. The conference, like the conference expansion, is a reason why we did also need to expand the playoff, because it is a little weird with some of these schedules. But it would be pretty clean if we had a 4-team playoff. This SEC championship game would be for all the marbles. The Big Ten championship game would be for all the marbles. Oregon, like most years when we had a 4-team playoff, when you're undefeated, they're that one undefeated team right now, you have a little bit of room for error. So a loss to Penn State, maybe Oregon gets the 4 seed. And then Notre Dame, likely the 3 seed. And then maybe one loss SMU, conference champion, gets the 4 seed. And I don't think there's really any other teams complaining. Like if SMU, a 1-loss champion, got that 4th spot, who's complaining about the Final Four in college football? Are Ohio State fans at 2 losses? Tennessee fans at 2 losses? Texas, who just lost the SEC championship game, or Georgia, who just lost the SEC championship game, will be their 3rd loss of the season. No Georgia fan is going to think they should be in the top 4. Oh, I'm not going to put anything past somebody's out there that thinks they should be top 4 still. But like last year, I wasn't making a case for Georgia, even though I know on a neutral field this team was a top 4 team. It's like it worked away. It worked out the way it kind of had to. There's a couple undefeated teams, a couple 1-loss conference champions, a team like Texas who beat the SEC champion, and a 1-loss, a 12-1 Georgia was on the outside looking in and really had no real reasonable, contention at the playoffs. So this year it would be a bunch of 2-loss teams. It would be a Penn State that just lost their second game in the Big Ten championship or something like that, or an ACC champion who has 2 losses, a 2-loss Big 12 champion. Like they wouldn't be. Yeah, you might be a little salty that you don't get a chance, but you understand it. So I think we as a college football world overreacted to just unprecedented dominance of Alabama and Clemson, and to an extent Ohio State. It's interesting to me. No one's crying over Georgia or anything. But Georgia went from being like a nobody, like you guys don't win anything, to immediately one of the same teams wins it every year. It's like, no, we were a new team. We were a new kid on the block. Like Michigan had not made a college football playoff until 2021. Georgia had the one, but like Georgia wasn't one of the same teams that was making it every year. And now all of a sudden Georgia's one of the evil empires. So, it is what it is. You start winning and people get tired of it. But that's what we've done with this 12-team playoff. Ohio State has a 2-loss season that is essentially a failure. Like they want to fire Ryan Day for 10-2, and I'm not telling them they should or shouldn't. I think Ryan Day is an excellent coach, but they might fire Ryan Day after going 10-2. The season is not over. They're the 8th ranked team in the country, or 8th seed right now. What are they? The 6th ranked team? I think they're 6th in the rankings. They could still win a national championship, and it doesn't feel like they should because it feels like their season is over. Alabama feels the same way. They're 9-3. Their season should be over. I felt like as a Georgia fan after the Ole Miss loss, shouldn't we basically be done? 2 losses, but obviously a lot of craziness is happening. Alabama and Ole Miss both lost again. And then Georgia had the big win over Tennessee. So even in the 4-team format, you saw a 2-loss Auburn that one year was ranked number 2. Because of how difficult their schedule was, but Georgia beat them in the SEC championship. So a 2-loss team can get in, and it's going to be a team that's got one of the most difficult schedules in all of college football. So that's all I have for this week of the Georgia Bulldogs Live here on the Georgia Voice of College Football. I appreciate everyone for tuning in. SEC championship, it should be a lot of fun this weekend. Oh, let me see. I didn't make any picks for these games. Let me rapid fire. Let me pick these conference championship games. Oregon's beating Penn State. As far as I don't know that Penn State's 11-1, played 12 games. I still don't know that they're even a good football team. Like, sure, they're good. I don't know how good they even are. I don't trust them. Oregon wins that one. 3.5 point spread. I'm taking Oregon to cover the spread as well. Iowa State, Arizona State. Give me Arizona State to win the Big 12. And then the ACC championship. This is probably my most controversial opinion, I guess, in the entire And let me get the rankings back up there. If SMU loses to Clemson, SMU should 100% be in the college football playoff. You cannot justify kicking SMU out of the playoff in favor of, especially you just put Miami. You just put Tulas Miami in there at number 12, right behind Miami, Alabama. Like if it was Ole Miss, it was South Carolina sitting there, we might have a conversation. But obviously SMU and Miami didn't play, but they are the one that's in the ACC championship. I don't think you can put a team that went 11-1 and played for the ACC championship and lost over the team that went 10-2 and didn't play in the game. So Tennessee is automatically in the playoff. They are not going to be punished for not playing in an extra game. They're not going to be punished for not playing an extra game, or I should say they're going to be rewarded for not playing an extra game. Indiana is in the playoff. They are not going to be punished for losing, for not playing an additional game. So to have SMU get punished for losing to Clemson in the ACC championship, I'm not here for it. SMU, what should they opt out of the ACC championship so they'll get in the playoff? Like, I just think it sets an awful precedent. And also, I think the cynical side of me, it's easier. It's easier to justify putting SMU. The committee doesn't have to make any decisions if Clemson beats SMU. That's the field right there. So that's, I think, the only thing that can keep. I guess there is other things that can happen. If UNLV beats Boise State, then what does that do? Then the Big 12 champion gets one of those top 4 seeds. And I'm not ruling out the Big 12 champion getting one of those top 4 seeds either. I think Iowa State and Arizona State sitting there at 15 and 16, or is it 14 and 15? One of the two. I think the win over the other one should be enough to jump Boise State. I know Ashton Genty's great and all that, but Boise State getting a first round bye in this playoff is just an absolute travesty. Like, this is a joke, a travesty, a sham, and a mockery. That's what it is. So I don't like Boise State. I'm hoping we get rid of these automatic top 4 byes. Like, we just need to go back to seeding this tournament. NCAA basketball tournament, winning a conference guarantees you get in. It doesn't guarantee you get any sort of seed. It just guarantees you get in. So hopefully that's what we do moving forward. But I am going to take SMU to beat Clemson. I think the brand bias here, I think a lot of people are just not really watching SMU play this year, and they're just like, oh, Clemson's will probably beat them. Like, SMU does not have a strong resume by any means, but this Clemson team is not impressive. So they've won a lot of these games in Charlotte. They have a lot of experience here. It's SMU's first time in the ACC. But yeah, crazy that we have 4 first-time teams here in the 4 Power 4 conferences right now. It's we could have 4 first-year teams all win these conferences, which would just be insane. So that's the last of it. SMU, win or lose, they should be in the playoffs. So Clemson is kind of that only variable. And so it's kind of awesome because I don't think a lot of people would be into that, would be locked into that game. Oh, man, I didn't even realize Penn State, Oregon's at 8 o'clock. The Big Ten, they spoiled me with these noon games all year. It's a solid slate. We should have Penn State, Oregon at noon, and then Georgia, Texas at 4, and then the ACC championship at 8. I would be here for that because Clemson, SMU, that's the one that has the strongest playoff implications. I think if Clemson wins, they steal that 12th spot, and that's your field, and Alabama's on the outside looking in. But if SMU wins, it looks like the committee has decided, and oh man, I'm blanking on the committee chair's name, the Michigan athletic director that they talked to on ESPN. He said nothing is going to change for these teams that have not played a game. So no one's jumping anyone. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, well, these 2 teams in the ACC champion in the championship game, that changes our opinion. Like, Georgia won the ACC now. Now we think Ole Miss is even better. I don't think nothing like that's going to change. If you're not playing, you are locked into where you are, other than somebody dropping out or something like that. You're not passing anybody if you're not playing. So for real this time, that is all I have for you folks. Please, I appreciate everyone who tuned in and is watching live. please like, share, and subscribe to the Georgia Voice of College Football on YouTube. We really appreciate it. This is a big week, National Signing Day tomorrow, so everyone get some sleep, and let's see what decisions some 17 and 18-year-olds make tomorrow is going to affect our future as college football fans. So let's all be very rational when it comes to that. And like always, this is conference championship week, so I appreciate everyone who tuned in. So that's all I have. Thanks, and go Dogs.